Thank you. That's Concora. Minister, I just wonder, has a budget been provided to facilitate the reopening of day services for people with disabilities? I was led to believe that a budget for this was meant to come to Cabinet last week, so I'm just wondering if it did, and if so, much has been allocated to ensure the full reopening of services, and if not, is that going to come to Cabinet, and what do you envisage the amount to be? A standalone budget needs to be provided for this very important service, and it should not be part of, say, the Winter Action Programme, for example. Now, a budget was provided to assist schools in their preparations to reopen in their entirety, and it was done to accommodate the vast majority of students on a full-time basis. So, Minister, I'd like to welcome the reopening of day services, most of which have reopened or will do so in the next 2 weeks. I'd like to commend all the staff involved in getting the centres open at a very short notice, and they are exceptionally difficult and unprecedented circumstances at the moment. And this partial reopening is welcome, but is it not, however, the case, Minister, that people with disabilities are being discriminated against? Because day services for adults are reopening at a much reduced capacity. Now, I've been told that people who were receiving, say, 5 full days pre-COVID are now getting 1, 2, or if they're lucky, 3 days. Should they not be treated on a par with equivalent services that have reopened? Like, day services are education and training services for adults and school leavers with disabilities. Schools have now fully reopened, so why not the day services? To end the discrimination and to allow day services to open safely, financial assistance is required from the government. So I think a ring-fenced budget for this is very important. But I mean, you have additional staff costs, because I think the HSE are advising staff in these centres to divide into teams, and that means sometimes you mean additional staff to cover staff absences, to rent extra space if it's needed, for the cleaning requirements, for work to premises, for the cost of PPE and sanitizer. All of those costs are very difficult, especially for Section 39 organisations to cover, and they do not know if they're going to receive funding from government towards them. They can't be expected to fundraise, especially in the current climate. And many Section 39 organisations quite agreed to being told to prepare to reopen in August. They were not given any support from the HSE to do so. Like, they would have welcomed just even advice, and they felt that wasn't forthcoming in a lot of instances. Now, on talking to many service providers, transport to the day services seems to be the biggest challenge at the moment. Capacities on buses has been drastically reduced as a result of the 2-metre rule, and the fact that many of the service users cannot wear a mask. So some service providers are not providing any transport at all. Others are only maybe offering transport on one day. So users are dependent on family to get there, and if that isn't available, then they can't actually use the service. One service in my constituency owns a 15-seater bus, but it can only take 3 people due to the 2-metre rule. Now, what they're doing several runs, but that's incurring extra cost, because there's the cost of the diesel, there's the wear and tear of the bus, there's the cost of the wages for the bus driver, and there's the additional PPE. So, Minister, will the government cover these costs? And as I feel, without these costs being covered, service providers will be unable to fully reopen, and discrimination with people with disabilities will continue. People living in residential settings, and those who are available to the limited respite that's currently being allocated, are being denied access to day services according to HSE guidelines. So again, I think that's totally unfair and must be addressed as well. And the practice of using nursing homes to house people with physical and intellectual disabilities is still being applied, and is totally unsuitable. In fact, it's soul destroying for the person forced to live there, not to mention very costly as well. Therapies such as occupational therapy, speech and language therapy, physiotherapy, they've not been resumed either, and they're vital services for people with disabilities. For example, stroke survivors, they need rehabilitation, they need community care. That will enable them to improve disability outcomes, improve their quality of life, reduce the likelihood of long-term residential care, even reduce their time in hospital, reduce the risk of another stroke. But without this care, the opposite is true. But what I'm being told is therapists are not available to carry out this work because they've been redeployed to contact testing and tracing, and that has to stop, because they are vital services, and we need those highly qualified staff back doing the job that they should be doing. I think we all know how devastating the last 6 months has been on service users. Like, these people were suddenly cut off from friends, from their daily routines. It's been extremely harsh on many who said they feel lonely, or they feel frustrated or bored, and sometimes not even comprehending why these services have been stopped. So it's had a very, very serious impact on people's mental health, and the fact that the services are not fully reopened, with many service providers indicating that they cannot see that happening for the foreseeable future. This needs to be addressed urgently to ensure the full resumption of services for people with disabilities. Now, it's also been brought to my attention that in relation to some school transport to special schools, I don't know if that's within your remit, or I should talk to Minister Madigan maybe, but it's just to say that the capacity on school buses going to special schools, they're treated as primary schools, so it's full capacity even though there are teenagers using that service, and that's causing a lot of concern for some parents as well. Thank you, Minister.